you're looking for a fun and meaningful way to connect with a loved one with dementia, music may be the answer. Even as other memories fade, people living with cognitive decline often remember music from their younger days, and listening to it can make them feel good, get them moving, and even reduce challenging behaviors. With a little knowledge, you can learn how to use music to make the dementia caregiving journey a bit less difficult. That's all up next on Still Time for Joy, where we share practical advice for weathering life's storms and inspiring stories of resilience. Hello, I'm Sandra Levine, host of Still Time for Joy. My guest today is Tara Jenkins, founder of Harmony in Dementia and a board-certified music therapist who co-authored a book you can use to more effectively enjoy music with your loved one, even as their dementia progresses. Welcome to the show, Tara.
Hi, Sandy. Thank you so much for having me today.
You are welcome. So it just seems obvious that music could help along the dementia journey. We all know that when we listen to a song we like, it can make us feel a little happier. Talk to me about a few examples of what you've seen during your many years as a music therapist where music has really helped.
Sure. One experience that comes to mind, I was working with somebody individually, so individual music therapy services, and they were mostly nonverbal, and they were pretty far along in their dementia journey. And so I'd never heard them speak in our sessions, but it was evident music was beneficial based on, nonverbal cues. So smiling, direct eye contact, engaging in music with me, playing music instruments, handheld percussion instruments. And one day, this client looked at me, made direct eye contact, and said, "I'm happy." And so, it was such a powerful moment, and you never know when you're going to make a connection with dementia and when someone living with dementia, especially with music. And so it just shows you how powerful and strong emotional responses you can get when you're working with somebody with music.
Do you have one more example?
Another one that comes to mind is a group experience. So I also see people in group settings. So a lot of times that's in a community or long-term care, assisted living, that sort of a thing. And I had a resident who's on the go. So somebody who's constantly moving, walking, not really sitting still. And a lot of times that person was becoming frustrating to the other members in the group, and as a music therapist, I'm always facilitating all of those emotions and how people are engaging with one another. But they were kind of frustrated by this individual. And so I was sharing James Brown. We were moving to the music. I Feel Good came on. We're dancing. I saw that individual walk over, big smile. I invited him into the group, and he was dancing with me and the rest of the group, and now the whole group is cheering him on. So now these individuals, his peers, are seeing him in a new light. Instead of seeing him as a frustration or, someone they don't want in the group because it's disrupting, now he's a part of that group, and then those meaningful relationships are built from that. So it's just another quick example of how music can be really meaningful for folks.
And you started to talk about this, but I'd like you to go into a little more detail. How do you work as a music therapist? You mentioned individually and in group settings, and what are some of the practices you engage in?
Sure, yeah. So I, as myself in private practice, I work individually. And so just like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, we have an assessment. And so we'll assess clients, and based on their needs and their preferences and kind of who we're working with, if we're working with them in the family or them individually, we'll develop a treatment plan. And so that'll have goals and objectives, and that kind of guides our work and how we work with people. So sometimes it's for isolation. So sometimes we're really focused on just getting someone engaged and stimulated if they're isolating in their home or even in a community. Sometimes I've had clients who self-isolate because the activities in the community are not meeting their needs. So I had one client who was significantly younger, so in his 50s or 60s. And then there were folks who were in their 80s and 90s. So the music that they liked was not his music. His music was Prince and disco. So, so that's one example of working with an individual. In the group setting, it's really about meeting the needs of lots of different ages. So I try to vary my music. A lot of times I like basing it on a theme. So sometimes it can be very specific. So it could be we're talking about Elvis Presley and his music, or it could be broad and we're talking about, songs for the winter or songs. I just highlight it for Black History Month, lots of different performers and musicians to celebrate that. So it really just depends on who's in front of me and their music preferences. And we do singing, moving, listening, and playing activities. So it's very well rounded. I sing and play guitar, and then I bring instruments, so drums, different percussion instruments. We move to music. We listen to music, analyze lyrics. So with some people, taking those lyrics, how are they meaningful to them? Songwriting. So sometimes we're doing fill in the blank songwriting where it's a familiar song, but we change the words to make it more meaningful. So there's really, the options are really endless. It just depends on who's in front of me and kind of what we want to work on.
And I've seen in the research that people who are having cognitive issues often do remember music because the music memories are spread over different parts of the brain. They're not just focused on one part. Do I have that part right?
Yes.
And have you seen in your experience that even when people can't remember a lot, that they still do remember songs? And isn't that interesting how the music memories are there even when so much else has faded away?
Yes, you've got it right. Yeah, music is centered throughout our brain. So a lot of times I'll say, this is a very I don't want to say simple explanation, but not going into all the science jargon, but it's throughout our brain. So sometimes, if someone's speech center is affected and they're having difficulty verbally communicating, they may still be able to sing. And that's because our neurons are firing to continue to make connections. And so building those neural connections, we're doing it right now, and we don't even realize it. And so that all comes into play with people living with dementia, that their neurons are going to continue to fire. And because music is multisensory, there's a lot of different sensory inputs. So, if they're not able to connect with playing an instrument, maybe when they hear that song, that's how they recall it. A lot of times clients will say to me, I don't know that song. And I'll say, well, let's give it a try. And then all of a sudden they're singing the words without lyrics in front of them. And so that's an example of that. I've had folks who, I've never heard them sing or speak before. And now that has happened in our work. So yeah, those moments happen quite often in my work. Yeah.
Now, you've been a board-certified music therapist since 2008. What in your own personal family experience got you interested in music therapy? And tell us what the educational requirements are like.
Sure. It really started with my grandmother. My grandmother had both some kind of mental health issues as well as pretty severe depression, as well as eventually dementia. And she was over medicated and then never kind of came back to baseline. And so there was a lot. There's kind of a lot there. And she went into long-term care. And so I always felt, I was in high school when she went into long-term care, and I always felt there was a way to reach her. I felt in those moments that I connected with her, but I didn't really know why, and I didn't really know how. And she loved Frank Sinatra, and she was that was her era and before, and sometimes we would share music, but a lot of times, it would just be sitting there with her, and she would call me by a different name. Sometimes she wouldn't recall my name, but she knew my face. And so that's kind of what led me to, I knew I wanted to work in that environment in some way to help people. And I was in marching band and theater and all the things in high school. I knew I didn't want to teach. I knew I didn't really want to be a performer. And that's kind of how I found music therapy. I started researching what careers are out there for music. And I read about music therapy, about it being a way to use music to help people. And that really resonated with me. And then, my journey kind of went from there. But as a music therapist, once I got accepted into a program, we have 4 years of coursework, and that's followed by a 6-month internship. And that comes out to be about a combined total of 1,200 hours of clinical training. So that's working with all different ages, and sometimes that's more than 1,200, but 1,200 is kind of the requirement. And then after that internship, we sit for a board exam. So we sit for a national board exam, and that's where we get the credential MTBC, or Music Therapist Board Certified. And our education is in music, medicine, and psychology. So I had to take an anatomy and physiology course along with music theory, along with abnormal psychology, and lots of other courses, but kind of just gives you an example of all of the different courses we take, and that's for an undergraduate program for a bachelor's, and then you can also get a master's and a PhD in music therapy as well.
A lot of training is involved.
Yeah.
So I am so happy to let people know about this book that you co-wrote called Music, Memory, and Meaning: How to Effectively Use Music to Connect with Aging Loved Ones. I think that this speaks volumes to your really heartfelt desire to help people living with dementia and caregivers, that you've written this book. And the point of the book is to help people who are not music therapists learn how to incorporate music into their experiences with their loved ones. Why did you write this book?
Yeah, I've always been passionate about helping caregivers and care partners, and that's kind of why I went back into private practice, honestly. I wanted to continue my clinical work, but I also wanted to make sure that there was education and training and resources out there. Caregivers are overworked, underpaid, a lot of times not paid at all. And there's always so much on their plates. And so how could we write something? I wrote it with 2 other music therapists, and our real goal was, how could we write something that we could make it easy for the caregiver, that they'd have the knowledge, the information, the tools, all they need is the book and a way to access music, so whether that's YouTube or Spotify or any digital platform for music, and then go from there. So that was really the goal, was to give people a way to access music in a meaningful way that takes it beyond just pressing play and sitting there. So a lot of times people don't know what to do, and then also providing the education, because sometimes there are misconceptions out there. So, what is music therapy versus what is using music in a therapeutic way? And so those 2 things look a little differently.
And I read your book, and I want to have you break it down in a second. But I first want to tell you that I helped my own mother for about 10 years along her journey with dementia. And boy, I wish I had your book back then, because I did try a few times to use music, and it just didn't work out for us. And I think I actually waited a little bit too long, because she just wasn't engaging with it at all. But I really didn't know where to start, and I just wish I had had these resources. I also think I didn't choose the right music. So talk to me about, how do you know what the right music is?
Sure. With anyone working with dementia, you are a detective, right? So there is a bit of guess and check in there. There is a lot of research out there that music from our late teens to early 20s is the music that's going to stay with us the longer. So I always say that that's a great place to start, but don't box yourself in and only share those songs. I also like to include songs from childhood, songs that friends or family listen to. I had an individual who may have not fit in that window for the song Sentimental Journey because of how old he was, but it's a song his mother sang when she cooked. So he heard it almost every day. So for him, Sentimental Journey, we used it at the end of every session. It was that important to him. So that's just an example, that's a starting point, that 18 to 25 range. I always say to ask them, what music do they like? If they can verbally tell you, that's a great starting point. If they can't, another way is, like I said, family and friends exploring their music collection. So did they have records? Did they have 8-track tapes? Do they have a digital playlist, a music playlist somewhere? That's a really good starting point. If they love the Beatles, Google is really our friend in this day and age. Could you search, music similar to the Beatles, or music that was popular, in 1964 or whatever that year was, that maybe resonates with them musically. And then there's also a lot of playlists already created out there. So I always say that's another good starting point. If it's overwhelming as a caregiver to create a playlist, I use Spotify. I'm not endorsed by them. It's just my preference. You can go on Spotify and search top hits from 1958 or, top disco songs or Motown songs. And there's a playlist created. So then you could share that with the person you're caring for, see what songs they're resonating with, they're dancing or they say they enjoy, and then create your playlist from that larger playlist. So that's another way you might be able to do that.
And it is very important to use the right music, because if you're using music that they don't like, they're not going to engage, right?
Yeah, I always like to stress, because I don't think it's talked about enough, that music experiences are not universal to everyone. And so that's also true for people living with dementia. And so there are songs out there that people might not want to listen to or that they don't connect with, and that's okay. So to relieve yourself of that pressure of it, every song has to work. You can change the song, you can come back and try again later. I give the example that I played French horn in college, and if I had to listen to some of the pieces that I had to play that gave me performance anxiety, that would not be helpful for me. So somebody might look at my background, see, oh, she was a French horn player and a musician. She might love this classical piece of music, and that might not be the case. So it's just something to keep in mind.
So your book, Music, Memory, and Meaning, is laid out in 3 parts. Talk to me about part 1. Part 1 is an introduction. What kind of information do you give to caregivers in part 1?
In part 1, it's really, why is music so powerful? So it goes into a little bit of the science and the history and what makes music so powerful for all of us, including those living with dementia. It also talks about how to set yourself up for success. So when you go to share music with someone, what are the things you can do so you'll both be successful and have a meaningful experience? And it also includes a questionnaire. And that is a very short version of what we would do in an assessment and a questionnaire that I would ask. But we really tried to pare that down to a 1-page where you can ask questions and find out more information about that person. And I also say, always make sure you're documenting both songs that provide a positive and negative responses. So any songs that have a strong emotional response, documenting that is really helpful, not only for you, but for anyone else who might be providing care for that person.
And that questionnaire is in the book. Mm-hmm. And then in part 2, there's actually a bunch of playlists. Talk to me about how the playlists were created and how people can use them.
Sure. So at that time, when we were coming together to write it, we all had 10 plus years of experience working with dementia. So the 3 of us, we started with what are the most familiar songs among all of our clients and in the areas we work. And then we sent out a survey to music therapists as well. So we asked for what their songs are, and we kind of put all of that together. And the 15 to 20 songs that were at the top of all of those lists went into the book. So we've got playlists from kind of the early 1900s through the 1970s, as well as country, Broadway, rock and roll. And so those are a starting point. So if you know someone likes a certain style of music or a decade of music, you can start with maybe those 15 to 20 songs and see if any of those resonate with the person you're caring for.
And there are hymns and there are patriotic songs. So those playlists can be very helpful for anyone who isn't sure where to start. And how about part 3? In part 3, you have engaged listening discussions.
Yes.
What are they?
Part 2, you'll see a music note next to some of the songs in the playlists. If there's a music note, I'll use the example, Love Me Tender. You'll flip to that part 3. You'd have the title, Love Me Tender, who it was made famous by, when it came out, maybe a fact or 2 about the song. Then there would be some suggestions while you're listening to the recording, what you could do to engage in the song. And then there are a couple discussion questions. And in the first part of the book, we encourage people to always start with yes or no questions and then go to open-ended questions. And that's how the format is in that third part. We start with yes or no questions, and then we give open-ended questions. So it gives you the opportunity to meet someone where they're at as far as verbally communicating.
And while music can bring up so many positive memories and be so fun and make us happy, sometimes a song can bring up sadness or grief. So what can family caregivers do when that happens?
Yeah, I always say, You just want to make sure that that individual feels safe and comfortable. And if those feelings are coming up, if they want to talk about them and you feel comfortable talking about them, because it's both ways. You as the caregiver might not feel comfortable having those discussions. But I would say that's a starting point. I would say reach out to a music therapist. If you don't know one, you can always find me, and I'm happy to connect you with someone, or I'm happy to talk through some things with you. I think it's important too to make sure your doctor, your social worker, whoever your care team is, just make sure that they're in the loop on that, because sometimes that excessive tearfulness or those feelings of grief could be another issue, right? It could be the music, it could be something else. So again, as a detective, it's a lot of guess and checking. Is it bringing up an emotional memory, or a memory that's sad, or, just really difficult for that person, or is there something else going on?
Tara, how do you feel about your own journey? You started out with the desire just to help your grandmother and became a board-certified music therapist, and you've helped thousands of people through your work. What do you think about what you've accomplished?
I feel really great about what I've accomplished. I think my passion is to help people. And so I feel really grateful to have the experiences and to be able to support people through some of the most challenging moments of their lives. And so many times I get messages, you've done so much for me, or so much for mom, or my sister didn't talk and now I had her back for that moment. And I'm just so thankful that I can kind of be the bridge or the vessel or the connection to make that happen for people.
Well, Tara Jenkins, board-certified music therapist, thank you for everything you're doing to make the dementia journey just a little bit easier. And thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
If you found today's show helpful, please share the information with someone who needs it, and follow Still Time for Joy for more practical tips on weathering life's storms, as well as inspiring stories of people who have turned their pain into purpose. Please consider supporting the work that goes into producing the show on Patreon. Follow Sandra Levine Productions on Facebook and YouTube, and learn more at sandralevine.com.